Hello, my name's John Cowie. I'm a retired minister and I've been part of the Liberton congregation for about 3 years now, when my wife and I moved here after we retired. The verse I've been asked to reflect on today is from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 1. In the New International Version translation, it reads, "Follow my example, as I follow the example of Christ." That sounds like a pretty bold statement. Follow my example. Is Paul really claiming that he's always capable of doing and saying the right thing? Do people ever imagine that church leaders are capable of a higher standard of behavior or lifestyle than other people? I don't know. But many working and retired ministers in the Church of Scotland belong to a Facebook group through which they share concerns. They ask advice and they share what's been going on in their own lives or in the congregation. And sometimes they ask for prayers for issues in the congregation. It's a mutual support group. And many find it very useful and comforting to know that they're not facing challenges alone. A while ago, a minister shared their frustration at only discovering at the end of a service something very important that had taken place in the community that week. Something so important that they would have liked to have been able to pray for or give thanks for while everybody was gathered. For myself, I've never forgotten the telling off that I got 35 years ago in Amsterdam when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. I'd not heard the news that morning, so had given no thanks for that. And that really disappointed some of the people who'd come to church that day. And now I always check the news before heading off to church. In fact, the statement, "follow my example," is very importantly qualified by the phrase, "as I follow the example of Christ." The verse doesn't really belong with chapter 11, but is the last sentence of a discussion in chapter 10, where Paul was discussing Christian freedom. It's not really about Christian leaders behaving, it's how does everybody meant to behave. Paul, on the surface, was considering a question he'd received about buying meat from a pagan temple in Corinth. Some Christians didn't worry about it, but others felt that the meat was tainted and would taint them if they consumed it. That might not seem to be concern for us today. However, at its heart is Christian freedom and how we use it. To paraphrase one biblical writer, it's as if Paul was saying to those who regard themselves as strong in faith, if you can choose where to use your freedom, you might as well choose what does least harm and shows love and respect for the other. You're not compromising your freedom by being bound by other people's scruples. In fact, the reverse is true. You're using your freedom to help the other and to serve the gospel. This has implications for our freedom as Christians and as neighbours. It speaks to how we use our vote at election time, the policies we support, how we spend our wealth on houses and the possessions we fill them with, and the way we use alcohol or spend on holidays or clothing, for example. On the one hand, the Christian is free. It's not other people's judgment that should govern us. On the other hand, a believer should always ask about the impact or effect of these things on the confidence or vulnerability or insecurity of others when we exercise our freedoms. For we've been granted our freedom to use it well, to bless the people with whom we live, and to bless the world in which we live. When Paul writes, "Follow my example, as I follow the example of Christ," it could sound incredibly presumptuous. But let's remember that Paul continually refers the Corinthian Christians back to Christ when he considers their questions or reacts to what he's heard about what's been happening in the Christian community in Corinth. So, imitate me as I imitate Christ might be better understood as saying, take Christ as your pattern, as I take him for mine. Make the pattern of your living humility, self-denial, and self-sacrifice as you see it in Jesus Christ. Paul isn't boasting or making a bid for power over the Corinthians. He's pointing them, as always, to Jesus Christ. So the question I offer you today is, how does the way you use your freedom point to Jesus Christ?